So first discussion that I'm going to go through is managing by exceptions with SmartList. So, everybody works with SmartList today, making different inquiries, lookups, things of that sort. You may have favorites and things like that that you're currently working with, but one of the things that I run into during any implementation and questions and things like that is, how can I have SmartList help me more in my business? So, we've got this inquiry, this lookup, this navigation tool that's out there with SmartList, but how can we better utilize it to help notify us and prompt us of things that are going on within the company? And the managing by exceptions, the definition that I like to give that, and let's get over there. So managing by exceptions, and what I've looked at for that is, you've got different tiers within your business. You've got the individuals that are doing the day-to-day work, and they're working through the system and keeping the company moving in the direction that it needs to. Then you've got a management team above that, and then a couple other tiers potentially above that. And you don't always need tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 notified when something happens in the system. So we talk about managing by exceptions as a way of, okay, how do I keep management focused on the things they truly need to be focused on? How do I keep the CFO focused on things they need to be focused on? How do I keep these individuals out of the nitty-gritty things that happen on a day-by-day basis? So we look at that from a SmartList standpoint of setting up notifications and helping really manage other individuals and helping them be notified of certain things that are going on. So an example here is, it's rules of deviations of a significant nature. So what I mean by that is, okay, you've got a purchase order that's over $100. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that this individual needs to get involved with it. So setting up these tiers of individuals who are going to get notified when that type of thing happens. So we've got purchases over budget amount. We've got items below a supply and demand level. Okay, well, from a distribution standpoint, there's some red flags that a warehouse manager would want to know about, but he wouldn't want to know as soon as something gets one below a reorder stock or something along those lines. But whenever a significant amount hits below that amount, then he wants to be notified because somebody's sleeping. Something's not going on and somebody's not managing it where they need to do it. The other one, customer AR over 121 days. We had a ha-ha with that while I was out at a customer last week where we had a specific name we gave customers that owe over that part of the year. I won't go into it, but it's fun. But again, those different levels of where you look for your departments to really get notified and manage those specific areas. So, out of the box, taking that premise and working with SmartList to make this happen, how can we do this type of thing? So to date, one of the things that we can do to help manage these things and really automate this so that when you get in and you start working with a SmartList, okay, I can go into a SmartList today and I can create a SmartList and I can add a filter to it and say, show me records that equal this much dollar amount, right? So I could go in right now and create one that on the customer SmartList, and we'll just navigate through this as quickly as we possibly can. But even just the out-of-the-box customer one, of course, has those wonderful columns in it for our aging buckets. If you haven't used those to date, we can find them underneath the columns, and we should end up with a whole bunch of them based off of the name that we gave them in our AR aging data, right? So let's say that I wanted to add one of those into this, and then I wanted to add add a search criteria just right on top of that. And I'll move it up to the top so we can see it. But it's real simple today to come in and add a search and say, you know what, I want to see whenever my 181 days over has any balance within it whatsoever. So here I can come in and say is greater than 0. And that's it. Real simple, out of the box configuration for finding anybody who has a balance over that. Yeah, Fabricam is terrible for this. But real quick definition of that. Well, how in the world would I best create this and then get it out to the users that it applies to? Okay, so I just created this favorite, and I'm ready to create it, but I'm ready to deploy it to other users. Well, I myself can go in and define it at this point and say, okay, I want to create a favorite, and this is just for myself. So I can be selfish, and I could keep it just for myself, and then that saves, and then I only see the smart list, and nobody else ever sees that specific smart list. Well, the next one above it that I like to use is the user class. Who's using the user classes to date? Anybody? Couple. Okay. So those are set up in your actual user setup. And what that does is whenever I'm configuring this smart list, if I save it and make it visible to a user class, that means anybody that's in my user class now gets this same SmartList and can utilize the SmartList, find the SmartList, look it up, and use it at that point. So user classes become a great way that I can say, okay, I'm getting in, and I'm trying to manage my department. I'm trying to get my users in the mindset that they need to and things that they need to watch and govern, and I'm going to save it to my user class at that point. And the idea is that you would have people within each one of the classes that would potentially set this up, or if you have one individual who's lucky enough to manage this type of thing, you could have them change their user class and then go in and set one up and then save it and so on and so forth. But the idea is on our user setup, presumably, no? Oh, it's because I got that open. On our user setup, you have that that class ID that we can set up on the user. You can have as many as you want to for this. There's other functions that come into play with the user class ID, such as organizational security and things like that for GL numbers, if anybody's using that for your org structure. But this gives us the ability that, okay, if I set up and I say Art AUS is set up as the accounting class, when I go in and I'm logged in as Art and I go into a SmartList and I create a favorite and say that it's for user class, then everybody in the accounting department essentially at that point gains access to that SmartList. It shows up on their favorites immediately, even though they didn't create it. But again, I'm creating these things, and all of a sudden individuals are able to utilize them and work with them. Instead of going out and now I'm creating SmartLists that are for the company or for the system-wide, and you've got everybody's initials just tagged all over these things and a huge list of stuff because people have different ways that they like to look at data. Everybody's got their own method. I do want to give an honorable mention for one of the new things that they added into the system to help manage that, just for anybody who was giggling when I said that, because I could hear pain in your voice also, is in the company setup, when you're setting up your company, you can actually tell it now. I know this is just a little tip and trick, but in your options, I'm in the right spot here. And I'm not. Where am I going? I will look it up. But in your setup, you can actually define it that you don't want SmartLists to save to the user anymore. System preferences. There we go. So under your system preferences in GP, you can actually set it up to default the view. So when somebody goes in and says that they want to create a favorite, it doesn't automatically default the system, and everybody's getting that. You can tell it you want it to go to the user ID. So just an honorable mention there. So the idea being is that now we can set up and create these SmartLists and push those out to user classes. And that's really one way of handling this. If we were going to manage specific individuals and things like that, and we only wanted that SmartList to show up on their system, one way we can handle that is, okay, you give them a notification, hey, I just created this new SmartList. I want you to go in, give it a name, and save it as your own. That's another way that you could do it. So instead of pushing it out to a user class and it rolls across all of those users, you could come in and say, okay, I'm going to create a favorite for this. I'm going to save it to my company right at the moment and just call it, customers over a certain amount, customers over. And I'll add that favorite. Well, then you could have the other user log in and grab that favorite from the list. And if you really, truly only wanted you and a couple of other individuals to have this, they could hop into it, hit favorites at the top, put their initials on it, and then add it as a favorite to their user ID. So that's one way you could deploy it out to just specific users. Obviously, user class would be an easy way of doing it. And then the strategy being there is that after you get everybody who wants to go in and take advantage of the SmartList, you go back into the existing one that's set up for the company-wide, you either delete it or you change it to your user ID to have it disappear so that everybody isn't seeing it. So this is one strategy that you can use to deploy those things to individuals at that point. But that's one way of managing those by exceptions. Again, you're looking for some individual to hopefully define these things, get into the SmartList, work with it, and then make definitions for those specific departments that they're in and help drive these SmartLists to notify you of that information. So whenever I created this one, I was just looking at 181 days and over as my filter. So remember, we were talking about significant impacts, significant data changes that were out there for these. Okay, well, maybe for an aging bucket, maybe not the 181 and over being the best example there, but maybe you look at different levels that come into play for it. So you may end up with specific ones where, okay, I want my AR department, of course, to know as soon as there's anything that hits this. So my low-level AR clerks are seeing this from a collection standpoint and going, oh, somebody's going to be looking at me. The management, the next level up, maybe they don't want to be notified of things until it's, a specific amount, and you set those up. So the strategy you want to look at, and the way that you always want to go into these things is, I want to start, and I know where the problem is to date, but really the main idea that you're going into with these is you want your SmartList to be blank when you define it. You want to create a SmartList with search criteria on it to the definition that it's blank. I mean, it may show up with things today, but the idea is that they're going to use this list. They're going to have customers pay off that amount that's out there, and once they dip below my criteria, my list no longer shows anything. And that's my standpoint that I'm looking for on these, is that anything that I'm using in a SmartList that I'm trying to manage departments, manage my company by, I want them to be clear. I don't want them to have any type of data showing up on there, because that's the idea of the SmartList itself. It's to notify us and let us know of something that's going on. We're not using it as an inquiry anymore. We're using it as a list of data, a list of attack points that we need to go and address in the system. So once we define those and we have them down to a specific point, again, if we wanted to come out and really go back to that standpoint of, I'll just make it something obscene, but the ending result there that we're looking for is just that, essentially nothing would show up on that SmartList when we looked at it. And again, at those tier levels, maybe this individual is up at the top of the AR department, and they're at a certain threshold that repeats those things, and they're not seeing any type of reminder showing up on their homepage. They're not getting notifications. Nobody's deploying those out to a report or notifying anybody of that change. And then you have another dollar set below there that hits another department. Okay, now they've got things showing up on theirs, and they go and attack it, or it's blank, and it just works its way down to all the different tiers that you need it to be. So that's one idea. Now, the nice thing is that you can always, with any one of these, if something does show up, if you have users outside of the system, there's ways that we can, of course, run off of this. Excel is a good way of doing it too, but let's say that you did have your SmartList set up and you really wanted to just utilize this for it. You can always export these types of solutions to Excel, no records, which is good. That's what we wanted. Or Word or print them or anything along those lines. So never worry about not being able to actually extract this data and email it out to somebody who needs to go and have an attack list for the specific list that it's for. All right, so the other side that we run into is then what we can build upon with that is we can actually add in SmartList Builder. So that was the other part of this is, okay, we've looked at the low level. We've talked about just the user classes that are available out of the box in GP to help govern these things and move them around. And then we also talked about kind of the Band-Aid method I have for just regular SmartList of assigning to users. Now, one of the nice things about SmartList Builder that we'll take a look at is I've got one out here underneath my sales. And I have one for Illinois customers. All right, so when I look at this specific one, it's got a filter out there where it's just where the user is Illinois. I've got another one out here where it's just for another specific set of customers. One of the other things that I can do is I can also have customer AR summary. And this is another one that I have built out here. Well, instead of going in and saying that I only want this user to look at these specific ones and everything, SmartList Builder gives me the ability to add filters on top of that to help govern these things even further. So let's take a look real quick at that area. So in SmartList Builder, I can set up, and if you haven't done this to date, I can actually define restrictions. So where we ran into with the other SmartList, we were setting up a SmartList favorite, defining restrictions on there, and then giving that to users and notifying them. This one allows me to take one governed SmartList in the system and say, okay, for this one, I want the customer class to contain USA, and only the users that I select below are the users that get that. So now you've got multiple users hitting the same SmartList, but whenever Joe USA hits my SmartList, they're only seeing customer class USA. Same thing for any of the other ones, for Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. Same thing, it's defined to a specific user down below. We can also use the user classes too. So it helps build upon what we've already got as a foundation. We have the user classes set up. So I could select my user classes and then assign this to specific user classes also. But the idea being there is maybe it's something beyond the customer class ID there containing a certain amount. Maybe it's a dollar amount. Maybe it's something else in one of the aging buckets that we want to look at. So it's not just a targeted list of types of customers, but instead we're saying, okay, whenever this list hits a certain dollar amount in the 121 and over, then it shows data. Before that, it doesn't actually show anything. So just to give you an idea of how that works, while I'm logged in as the SA user, I see everything in this. I have all classes. It's not filtering because it's not limited to that specific user. But if I was to flip over to one of these other users where I've done that definition, we'll give it a second just to fire up here. There we go. When that user hops into SmartList with that definition on it, again, we're giving them that transparency, and this comes in handy for, customer lists and things like that too. But if we hop into customer AR summary, it's just the Australia user. So again, taking that same premise that maybe this is a management list for him to go in and look at 181 and over only. Okay, so he has a targeted list where he's just got his Australia customers, and he can go in and look at those. And then when somebody else logs in, they have a different set of customers that they would go through and look at. So again, using that managing by exception to help drive those different characteristics. And what does this do for the user as they're looking at it? Let's say that user wanted to put it as a notification on his home page. So let's go in and we'll do a to-do section. We're going to add a reminder that is based off of the smart list we just put out there. So again, I'm setting up my reminder for my home page to be anytime that there's any records showing up in there. So we're taking that premise that we're looking for these smart lists to be blank once we have them developed to the point where our notifications are done. So we want to get them defined to the point where that person is going to barrel through that list of information. They're going to get it fixed. And once the customers, in this example, were paid up, they drop off that list, and all of a sudden we have 0 records showing. So taking that same premise there, if we want to give them a little visual cue there, we set it up as display as queue, and that just gives them a little icon on there, which is a stack of paper, and says, here's your workload. So the user sets it up on their home page, and again, their experience at that point is 7 records. Okay, well, now if I log in as Joe USA and I add the same one, it's going to be a different number of records because his smart list is filtered specifically on how I set it up in the smart list builder. So again, driving those experiences differently from user to user to help them notified of the specific area that they need to get into. The only thing that I would suggest doing is once we set one up, we actually give it a favorite name because it looks kind of ugly on the home page whenever you do that. You notice it's just star. Go out and do something. So the only thing that I would have changed for it. But the idea, again, there being that the users would jump in and work with those specific areas. And again, as they go through and they accept those payments and pay down those balances for those customers, as soon as this customer pays up, he drops off my list, my workload goes down. Another one pays off, drops off the list, and my workload still goes down. So the idea being that they're working to 0 on their workload on a daily basis. And the only time that we worry about these is if the number of records grows too much that it notifies the next one. Okay, well now that individual sees these shows up on his management list, and he's going to go talk to Art and say, why do I have this many showing up? So that Art moves and starts working on those things. Or maybe the manager needs to step in and talk with the individual or the customer. So that's the idea. We're looking for departmental management through the smart lists, giving individuals the visibility to have an attack list, a list of things that they should address on a daily basis using the smart list filters with searches and such. Smart List Builder just gives us that ability above and beyond that to define specific to a user a specific search criteria that they don't actually have any control over. So when that user gets in, they can't change it from, I'm just looking at customer classes with AUS in it. They have no control over that. Smart List Builder gave us that ability to kind of lock that down so that the user can't try to go out and look at other customers at that point.